Greg Larkin is an intentional investor, out now, Epsilon Theory, YouTube, Panoptica. We talk about his first F you pay me moment right before the subprime crisis kicked off in 2007. We talked about growing up in a feral and fertile late 80s, early 90s New York City. I love that framing. And we talk about how Langston Hughes, punk rock, and a blood bank job on 9/11 turned him into the incredible community builder he is today at Punks and Pinstripes. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
So at the time, I was riding high. I was a very young analyst at a startup called Innovest. I had written the first ever public prediction of that saying basically that the booming housing market was going to collapse. He goes, "It is 4:12 p.m. The market closes at 4:30 p.m. What's my trade, asshole?" And I said, "I think Citigroup is going to survive this mess. I do not think Lehman Brothers will." He goes, "Thank you. That's what I think too." I was born in Rockaway, Queens. Rockaway, where I grew up, despite being violent and dangerous, and half of it was dangerous from bullying and the other half was dangerous from the crack epidemic. But I look back on it with such fondness. Like, it was never personal. In sophomore year English, we did a course on the Harlem Renaissance. And for some reason, I fell in love with the poetry of Langston Hughes. It just rocked my world in a very secretive sort of way. I would finish football practice and every day take the Metro North train down to Harlem because I was obsessed with the ghost of Langston Hughes. Everything that makes you undateable in high school is very valuable currency here at CBGBs. You know what I mean? It was such a come here and be as weird as you can. The best, most creative, most innovative businesses, art, music, communities are going to form from people who are like, "I'm swimming against the tide and there's nothing you can do about it." I got a job as a community organizer for the New York Blood Center. When September 11th happened, it became my job to coordinate with the Red Cross. I was part of the emergency response. That was the first time I sort of had this thing, which is you never know. Now would be a good time for you to be a man and step up and focus and kind of put your feelings to the side and do what needs to be done.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Ziegler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Ziegler is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sunpoint Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory, YouTube, and Panoptica, the show where portfolio meets purpose, or more plainly, the show where I ask the best of high finance and business questions about everything except high finance or business, aka the stuff that actually matters in life. I'm Matt Ziegler. Who's here with me today? I've got to start by just going through the oeuvre of books and work. I'm going to start with this classic right here. This was the follow-up to his hit book, This Might Make Me Tired. I think it was Punk Rock Parenting Tips. Sing Backwards and Sleep. This was a real classic here. I was very grateful when I got that one from Amazon. And other books like Please Kill Me, the uncensored oral history of shorting the subprime crisis about 20 years in. That's what it gets to be early. You get that 20th anniversary. And my personal favorite, Kitschy Confidential. This is a great one right here. You got to love Kitschy Confidential. We'll see if we can get that in focus. I think I just did this. Adventures in the Corporate Underbelly, P.S. Pins. This was the book that, a young Matt going into financial meetings would style my little punk rock 1-inch buttons on my shirt, thanks to this classic, Kitschy Confidential. Who can forget it? Look for them on Amazon, wherever fine books are sold. Yes, he called subprime. No, he's not known for his vacation home in the hills from it, but he is known for helping busy professionals climb their second mountains in life outside of work. Punks and Pinstripes founder, the one and only Greg Larkin. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Remember writing all those books? How much blood, sweat, and energy you toiled into those?
Absolutely. Just don't eat the seafood on Fridays.
What day of the week was that? Yeah.
Yeah. Or Monday. It's Monday. Never eat fish on Monday.
Does that rule still exist? Because in my mind it still exists, and I follow it, and I think about it in restaurants to this day.
You and me both, kid.
All right, man. Timeless wisdom. There's a million places we could start. I'm thrusting this event on you now. You were on a road show, 2007-ish, ready to pitch this crazy hedge fund dude, Eric Scott, maybe Shot. Can you tell me the story of that meeting? Can we start there before we go back in time?
Oh, my Lord.
This is how this is going to go.
Wow. You did your homework, Matt. I'll tell you the story. All right. So this is my first ever fuck you pay me meeting. You've heard me say before, you are not an actual entrepreneur or an actual investor until you've had your first fuck you pay me meeting. And Eric Schott was my first. So at the time, I was riding high. I was a very young analyst at a startup called Innovest. I had written the first ever public prediction of saying basically that the booming housing market was going to collapse. And my startup Innovest was like, look, we're starting to get quite a bit of traction in Europe. You should go over to Europe and meet some of our prospects and clients over there and share your research with them and make us look good. And so I flew over. My first meeting was with this guy who was one of the most acclaimed and scariest, most notorious, like Bill Ackman style, but at Europe, of European hedge fund managers. And I meet with him. He walks into this huge conference room. He's 35 minutes late. He has a Bluetooth earpiece in his ear and a shaved head. There is not a smile on his face. He's not happy to see me. He walks in, he takes a seat, does not shake my hand, and he says, start. Not like, hey, thanks for coming today. Was your flight? Nothing. No pleasantries. He sits down, earpiece is on, start. And I start walking through my 20 slides of charts and data, like, we think it's 2007. So Lehman is still a going concern. Bear Stearns is still a going concern. Like we have not hit the apex of the pain.
We're ring fencing still, maybe even at that point, at best.
Yeah, and when there was these two subprime funds started to implode called Household Finance, which was a division of HSBC. And Ben Bernanke at the time was like, we think that's all. Like something had to give. We think that was the thing to give. We're good. Greenspan, same thing. All right. So I'm starting to sort of craft my arguments, and he holds up his hand and he says, and like signaling for me to stop. And I stop. He goes, it is 4:12 p.m. The market closes at 4:30 p.m. What's my trade, asshole? That's it. That's all he said. I don't have time. And I was like, and he just gave me this like shooting daggers out of his eyes. And he says, and so I'm like, what's my move? So I just like fast forwarded to my last slide. And I said, I think Citigroup is going to survive this mess. I do not think Lehman Brothers will. He goes, Thank you. That's what I think too. He gets up, shakes my hands, leaves the room. Meeting adjourned. That's it. That was the meeting. That was Eric Schott. And at the time, I literally had shell shock from that meeting because he was such a prick. I'd never experienced that. And so there's other things about him that you need to know, but I'm not going to share that right now, actually. So I called up my CEO who knew this guy, who had intentionally sent me over. I'm like, Matthew, I just want to give you the full context of how this meeting went. I don't know if I'm seriously in trouble. Like, did I ruin anything? He's like, no, you just had your first fuck you pay me meeting. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, always be prepared for the fuck you pay me meeting. Meaning anytime you go into a meeting with an investor, with a trader, or you're pitching like your startup for an investment, some people are going to be polite, kind, and sweet, and other people are going to be like, no, cut past the bullshit, fuck you, pay me. What are we doing? How am I making money? What's my trade, asshole? And if you don't know how to answer that question, you are not prepared for the meeting. It is the most important thing to always be prepared to pass the fuck you pay me test. Great question, Matt Ziegler. God damn, you did your homework.
Cheers to you, sir. All right, take me all the way back. Young Greg Larkin is born into this world. Are you born in New York City?
Yeah.
Like literal New York City proper? Where are you born?
Queens.
Queens. Are mom and dad from there too? Immigrants? What's
Depends
the story?
how you count.
All right. Count it as you count it. What's the family lore?
My dad grew up in Brooklyn and Queens. My mom grew up in Long Island and Chelsea. I was born in Rockaway, Queens. And my stepmother, who came into my life when I was 12, moved to America from Romania when she was 17 and grew up in Flushing, Queens. So I'm kind of New York City, like through and through.
All the way through and through. And especially with that too. Shout out to Flushing and all the great bakeries and other things that are no longer there. Action Bronson too.
There's a few things.
There's still
Flushing.
some left, right? Yeah, there's still some good food there.
Yeah, you can do great in Flushing.
You can do great in Flushing. All right, I'm coming for the tour of Flushing at some point. In the meantime, though, what are mom and dad and then later stepmom like? Are they working in the city? What kind of stuff are they doing? What are the dinner table conversations like, if there ever were one?
My dad was everyone was either a psychologist or in the business of kind of social worky. So my dad worked for the city, designing in the Department of Mental Health, designing treatment programs for mentally ill drug addicts. And he created something that became the national standard for like public treatment of what's called dual diagnosis, mental illness and drug addiction. I should also say that he hated his job. So from a very young age, I was seeing my dad come home every day and like miserable. He hated it. He was never happy with work. He was very happy with work when he just got to do his job, but the bureaucracy and the politics of it just ground him down. My mom worked for the city too, also as a sort of social worker. And my stepmother was a psychologist working with mentally ill people for the city. So I come from psychology, social work, people who were employed by the government to do that.
So I'm just curious, and this is like current modern era Greg looking back on your experience then, that hatred for the bureaucracy of where they go to work, that whole feeling of just like going to work and coming home angry about things.
Yeah.
Did that just get in your head? Like, I don't like the way this feels. How did that affect you as a young person? Or did it? Maybe it rolled off your back and you didn't think about it again.
No, it affected me very deeply. I think if my father was born in a different era, he would have been an entrepreneur. He happened to be born when he was born, like baby boomer. And you know, the culture he grew up in was you get one job and you endure it for the rest of your life. Whether or not it fits who you are, whether or not you like it, whether or not it suits you, whether or not you're great at it, whether it's fulfilling, almost was beside the point. And he found within his work some outlets for innovation and creativity and excellence, but they were few and far between. And so I think when I started to, later on in my career, work for huge companies, which were where self-preservation and self-promotion were much higher priorities for the majority of the people there than impactfulness, innovation, solving a hard problem in a unique and differentiated way. I was terrified of becoming him and experiencing that sense of being trapped that I saw him take home. And when I saw the emotional toll that started to take on me, I immediately was like, oh shit. Oh shit. Like, either I have a choice to make. I work like he worked, or I do something else. And so I had this really perverse thing not to become as it pertains to work. I think a lot of people, like Gen X, Gen Z, the sons of boomers, I think a lot of them had that, and happened to have come of age when a huge pool of venture capital and startups, and that was a very viable option for if working in IBM for 50 years is not something that appeals to you, you don't have to. You know, if working for the city of New York for 40 years is not something you want to do, you don't have to. That you don't have to option didn't feel real when you were his age. And so I was very aware at a very early age of just there's another path if you want to take it.
All right, so young Greg, I'm thinking like elementary and middle school. You're playing sports, you're listening to music, you running amok around the city. Like, what are you into pre-pubescent awareness of the world? What do you actually care about?
I was a really depressed kid, actually. I
All
was
those
almost,
psychologists in the house.
you know,
And you're
well,
a
my
sad boy.
parents got divorced when I was 7.
Right.
I was almost held back in every elementary school grade because I suffered and my grades were horrible. I couldn't focus. I was sort of an emotional train wreck. I would say there were a few things that gave me respite from like the state of my existence. All of them. Yeah. So couple of silver linings. Here we go. The New York Mets in the 1980s was definitely one of them. I was living in Queens when the Mets won. I was 8 years old when the Mets won the World Series in 1986.
Shout out to 86, baby. All right.
Yeah.
Good for you for being there.
My teacher's husband was the pitching scout for the New York Mets. So the 1986 Mets hosted a Christmas party, and like Mookie Wilson was Santa Claus, and that was a highlight for sure. Rockaway, where I grew up, despite being violent and dangerous and half of it was dangerous from bullying, and the other half was dangerous from the crack epidemic. Like half of Rockaway was a total ghetto, and the other half was like the sons and daughters of Irish cops and firefighters that would just kick you, get your ass kicked no matter what. But whether it was because of like the Irish kids or whether it was the ghetto kids, you never knew. It was just gonna happen.
It was just coming for you. Yeah.
But I look back on it with such fondness. Like it was never personal. You know, they were like, what, you're not playing basketball today just because we broke your glasses yesterday? It was always like, it was just like, it was a grittiness to it that is sort of lost in gentrified New York. I love going back to Rockaway. I love going to the parts of Rockaway that are unchanged from when I was a kid. It's a blast. And then my older brother is 4 years older than me. And he is to this day my hero. And he way younger than I should have been, with all the tumultuousness of my parents' divorce and all that craziness. My brother very much took me under his wing, which meant that I got introduced to all my brother's friends and all my brother's music at a very, very young age. And which meant I was going out to shows and punk music, and like CBGBs used to have a Saturday matinee where it was all ages. And my brother, my 4-year, you know, when my brother was 16 and I was 12, he was like, yeah, come on, you can come with. And that was so thrilling, and I became like the mascot for a bunch of his friends, and it really changed like that whole like punk element that still is a very defining characteristic of my mindset.
Wait. Time machine me, because this is like 1990 when you're becoming cool older brother mascot.
Give or take, yeah.
Early 90s, give or take.
Late 80s, early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so like Saturday matinees at CBGBs, like what are some of the things you're seeing? I don't care if they're known now. I'm just curious where you're like.
It wasn't just punk music, I should add.
CBGBs there was a lot going on.
Yeah, so I mean, New York was a really different place back then. It was pretty depressed and beat up, but like there was so much. It was so fertile, you know. It was feral and fertile, and I think people forget that. It was scary. There were definitely, like, without even thinking about it, you just knew when you couldn't be on your side of the street. You could smell who was walking behind you and in front of you. You had to be a lot more aware of your surroundings, and it's so interesting, like walking around New York City today, where like people are like, where do you get good matcha around here? And I'm like, you have no idea what this block used to be like, you know?
With the AirPods in, the phone out in front of them.
Phone out in front. I struggle with that, but yes. So what was it like? So it was post-punk at this point, you know, and it was, not only was it post-punk, it was post-hardcore, which was this sort of, as a lot of the founding fathers of punk, like the Talking Heads, kind of became new wave. Then there was this next wave of punk, which was hardcore, which was like taking it back underground, making it even more aggressive and fast, like Bad Brains, and even the Beastie Boys when they first started out, that's what they were. And then there was like whatever happened after that. And that's kind of where I came in. So it was definitely on the like sunset of what had come before. And it wasn't, but what I think it was is like everything that makes you undateable in high school is very valuable currency here at CBGBs. You know what I mean? It was such a like, come here and be as weird as you can. And I just appreciated that at the time. In retrospect, I'm like, how unbearably like pretentious and, you know, like I'm terminally unique. There was a lot of like, there's an equivalent of it in today's New York. It's never going to go away in this city. But I think there's just, I think the thing that stayed with me and has structured my life is when you are kind of defiantly yourself. And you have to fight a little bit and incur some risk a little bit for being the truest version of yourself. The best, most creative, most innovative businesses, art, music, communities are going to form from people who are like, I'm swimming against the tide and there's nothing you can do about it. And so, when there's a direct thread between kind of the punk that I experienced at that young age, and then later on when I worked on Wall Street, my ability to sort of like smell business punks. That was a very formative experience for me. It was just like that defiant individuality.
I'm curious, and this is especially like into the high school years. I'm curious because you have like, what's school Greg like versus what's CBGBs Greg like? Is there conflict? Is there a harmony? Are you bringing CBGBs to school? Are you like checking these things in different boxes? How are you understanding this in high school?
Good question. So when I was 12, we moved out of Queens. Again, I had horrible grades. My dad was getting remarried. For like New York City public schools at that time, it's like if you couldn't get into one of the gifted and talented schools, you were going to be in a school which was so bad that your life was going to be severely dangerous. So we moved. We moved to Westchester, to a town called Rye. The way I describe it is like I went from Irish firefighter racism to Morgan Stanley racism. And that was a very different environment for me. Rye is the archetype of wealthy New York City suburb. It's about 35 minutes away from the city, but like it's a world apart. There's a huge difference. Eventually I sort of met when I was, I'd say, a freshman in high school in Rye, I kind of formed a crew of friends who I'm still friends with to this day, very, very much so. But I played football in high school. My grades improved. I kind of got my act together to a certain extent. I started doing well. I started to like do better. I was just doing better. So high school football, Greg, and there was this, I also, it's a weird story, Matt, but I fell in love. We had to do a course when I was in sophomore year English. We did a course on the Harlem Renaissance. And for some reason, I fell in love with the poetry of Langston Hughes.
How could you not?
It was so like, it just rocked my world. And I don't know what happened, but it rocked my world. And in a very secretive sort of way, I would like finish football practice and every day take the Metro North train down to Harlem, get out at 125th Street. Mind you, this is early 1990s Harlem.
Yeah.
Every building was a boarded up brownstone. It was very dangerous. Everyone's parents were like, do not ever, 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 ever get out at 125th Street before Grand Central. It is absolutely verboten. And I did the verboten thing, and I got out at Harlem because I was obsessed with like the ghost of Langston Hughes. And so for like a long time, I would like go to where he lived. I would do research on him. I would go to the Schomburg Library and like learn more about Langston Hughes. And at a certain point, like people were like, my buddy Mark Marchese was like, dude, why are you always leaving football practice? Like, why don't you hang out ever afterwards? Like, what's your hurry? And I'm like, well, come for a ride. I'll show you stuff, you know? And so I kind of formed this crew of friends that lived my city life with me. But when we were out in Westchester, it was a very different existence than when we were in the city. You know, we were going to like shitty keg parties in basements, but in the city, it was like, again, it was very different back then. But by the time we were like 15, 16 years old, at 16 years old, there was a bar called the Three of Cups Lounge in the East Village. It was this beautiful shithole basement dive bar. We were regulars at it and they were thrilled that we weren't heroin addicts.
Right.
You know, it was just,
You're a very viable customer.
we were great, you know,
Right.
like the bartender, like first rounds on me kids. It was no problem. It was such a different time, but it was like, and it, by the way, it wasn't like a high school bar. You know, it was just a dive bar. Everyone was 10 years older than we were. But we just, you know, it was fine. We didn't bother anyone. No one bothered us. We had our own music circuit. We had our ABC No Rio CBGBs. There's a place in Tribeca called Wetlands, which is where like Blues Traveler started off. And who is that band? Pocket Full of Kryptonite.
Spin Doctors.
Spin Doctors played there. This other band
A lot of
called
great
The
Spin
Authority.
Doctors.
A lot of like kind of the jam band scene was playing out of there. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then, you know, but it was still a time where like you would get out of Wetlands at like, you know, 1 a.m. and walk out onto West Street, and you still had like prostitutes walking the track. Like, hey baby, you need a date? You know, and that still happened. It was very much what happened. And the dude that sold you weed also was selling crack. You know, it was like just before Giuliani and gentrification. It was just there.
Yeah, just enough that you saw it, experienced it, lived it at a developmental part of life. Football player Greg, how's it? Like, this makes sense to me in lots of ways. But
Why?
at the same time, this is what I'm curious about. Was it, how do you end up on the team? Is it just something you should do because now you're living in Rye? Does somebody convince you to come out? What was like the team aspect of playing a team sport that you were like, I don't have to resist this. I don't have to fight this. I can be into this. Maybe it was you were just good at it. I'm curious.
I wasn't very good at it. I started, but I wasn't great.
Subjectively.
So for one thing, it was sort of the thing that everyone in Rye did. When I was 16 and I had a big growth spurt, I've basically been 6'2", somewhere between 220 and 250 since I was 17.
That's a football team asset when you're 16,
Yeah.
17 years old. Yeah.
A lot of my friends are on the team. And I think initially I did it because I felt like it's just the thing you're supposed to do. When I was a junior in high school, we made it to the state championship. I get very emotional thinking about this, but one of the guys who was the captain of that team was such a stellar human being. There are two guys who were captains of that team who one was Chris Mellow and another guy was Brad Soma. And they were such great examples of excellent leadership. Brad wound up playing serious football in college. Chris was killed on 9/11. He was in one of the planes. Sorry.
No, that's the team got to the state championship.
Yeah.
Lost.
We lost.
What made the leadership? Talk about them for a second. What made them stand out as leaders, especially as what I'm going to call peer leaders? Not. There's a difference when you're a kid too, when you recognize like these are not the adults. They're just acting in a way that most of the kids around me aren't acting.
So Brad Soma was, first of all, he was gigantic. He was 250 pounds of muscle, call it 6'2", 250. He was the only person I'd ever seen who could like run full speed with his upper body parallel to the ground.
God.
So, and so he was an incredibly talented athlete. But more than anything, he was sort of the captain of the offensive line, and I played on the offensive line. He was so he was a mentor. He really was just adamant about mentorship. He put the hours in, he worked with you. If other people who were great started acting like assholes and bullies, which happens on football teams, he would like intervene.
He'd say the hard thing. Like he'd be like, guys, this is how this works.
Yeah, and you know, and for a lot of the younger kids who were rookies and, you know, coming onto the team, he just made a point to sort of create space for them to feel included. And I really admired that about him. I haven't kept in touch with him, but at the time I saw him as a great leader. I would say Chris was the same way. We had one of the other kids on the team found out that he had a genetic. This was probably one of our most gifted players. He found out that he had a genetic muscle disease and had to stop playing in the middle of the season. And I'll never forget how Chris Mellow kind of rallied us after that. He was also incredibly talented, but he was just a very supportive, you know, we can go through hard things together. Like you're not gonna win every game. You know, I think the ability to rally and emerge from adversity with greater sense of cohesion is, if anything, I think that's the testament of leadership. And I experienced those two demonstrating that kind of leadership really early in my life. I'm very lucky for that.
Yeah, I'll say that's really beautiful.
And it really, fuck, I'm getting emotional about it, but
You should. This is crazy. Yeah.
When I heard that Chris died on September 11th, that was one of the, that was a really hard thing for me to hear. I still think about him a lot. He was a good guy.
It makes it extra important to talk about people like that.
Yeah.
And say their names out loud and remember they live on through us. It's a crazy thing how that plays out, but
yeah, I hope so. I learned a lot from him.
Cheers to Chris. Get me through high school. Like, is college an obvious thing for you?
Yes.
Why? Because the school guidance counselor said so, or something else?
No, yes. Um, but my grades were good in high school. More importantly, I found subjects and I started to realize that there were things I was good at. I was a good writer. I started to realize that when I was passionate about something, I would learn more about it than anybody else. I was never going to be passionate about chemistry, but I became really passionate about the Harlem Renaissance to the point where, to this day, I'm like, I discovered that I was uniquely gifted at certain things if I cared about them. And so I think that was just thrilling, going from a kid who was nearly going to be held back to someone who was uniquely gifted at like taking really complex things, kind of getting to the essence of them, being able to storytell in a way that made the complex accessible. So the first time I took a class in economics was in high school, and economics is often taught like physics, and we had to take the AP exam in economics, and that ended at the end of the third quarter, and then we had an extra quarter to fill. And and so it became a lot more like, all right, we don't have to pass any tests anymore. Let's just learn about actual economics now. And I got so locked in that economics is this way in which you can kind of use math to explain how the world is working. Economics is about human behavior. It's about people's assessment, either individually or collectively, about risk and reward. And incentives and disincentives, and the trade-offs you have to make between the present and the future, and the ways in which historical trends are or are not a foreshadowing of future events. And once it was sort of that, I became such a good economist. I remember the first time that happened, and there was you had to write an opinion about something. I don't remember what. But I got a 25 out of 15 on this 2-page essay. Mr. Saracen was my economics professor.
Okay,
teacher.
This is high school AP economics, basically.
Yeah.
You got a 25 out of 15. That's a law of economics right there.
Yeah, he was just like, Greg, can we read this to the class? And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, so there was also this other, I started to develop a love of learning, and I started also to develop a sense of confidence about there might be things that I'm better at understanding than most people. And that was really thrilling. High school into college, I got accepted to Brandeis University. My parents, God bless them, and when I say my parents, I mean my father and stepmother, encouraged me to defer admission and go to Italy for a year and screw around in Italy. And I did. So I didn't go straight to college. I deferred admission to Brandeis University and went and lived in Italy for a year and traveled around Europe and traveled around Italy and learned Italian. And my world became so big in the fact that New York was this cool place. I never knew that before. I didn't realize that people thought New York was cool. And so
you did the rest of the world to say oh, you're from New York. And you're like, the crap?
Well, you see
the
this difference between
Irish
how
racism?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because
what part do you want?
it was also weird because my Rockaway, where I grew up, was right next to Hollis, where a lot of hip hop was born and where Run DMC and Def Jam came from. I didn't know that. You know what I mean? It was John Gotti was from Howard Beach, like in Rego Park, two neighborhoods away. I just had no idea that what was just local color, you know, was something that the world was watching. You know what I mean? It didn't really dawn on me until I was like in the mountains of Italy and people are like, New York, Rana DMC. You know? I don't know. Tribe Called Quest. I'm like,
Thank
well,
you
yeah, those
for
guys
your
are right.
contribution to Adidas.
Seriously. Yeah, so that was an incredible experience. And then I went back to start my university at Brandeis University, which is basically this like colony of Long Island in a suburb of Boston. And I'm like, holy shit, my world just went from being very big to extremely small. And so after a year at Brandeis, I transferred to McGill in Montreal, and that's where I did my undergrad.
The decision to move from, and now it makes a lot of sense why Brandeis would have felt really strange to you. Especially going New York to Italy to weird Boston suburb.
Yeah, it was brutal, and it's really interesting. You know how I was talking before about how like, so first of all, I think this is something that a lot of New York City kids experience, is that the rest of the world can feel very insular when you've grown up in a city which is a city of the world. There are not many cities of the world. And New York happens to be one of them. And so other places can feel extremely claustrophobic and insular very quickly. I couldn't believe that anybody who grew up in suburban Long Island would do anything like go to Brandeis in Waltham, Massachusetts. Like, why would you make your world smaller and not bigger? And there's a bunch of really good reasons, but at the time I was so judgy about it. I hated it. I got great grades. And I will say this, Matt Ziegler, having spent a year like discovering girls, you know, running around, having the freedom to get, like, after that year of just traveling and going crazy and coming back to the city for the summer, I'm like, I'm done. I just need to like hunker down and focus and do good work and like I was so ready to be a student. And like, it was I didn't have that structure and I really wanted it back. So when I went to Brandeis, I was like, let's go, let's get to work. Let's fucking crush this. And I got excellent grades and I was really like, and I was into it.
So you jumped to McGill. Do you know, are you going like, is it econ? Is it a finance degree? Do you have any direction on, is the major selected at any point along this journey yet?
Yes. I took one course at Brandeis by a guy called Robert Art. Robert Art was a professor of international relations. I might be getting this wrong. He was super influential, like advised, I'm going to say, he might have worked for Kissinger. He was a big deal. And he had one of the toughest classes I took, but it was so interesting. I didn't know what international relations was when I signed up for the class. I assumed that it was like how to be an international business person.
You're like, I went to Italy, guys.
I know. I thought it was
great.
literally going to be like how to be a jet setter. And it was not. It was about like conflict and diplomacy and war. Statecraft.
Kissinger's Guide to Jet Setting.
Yeah, I know, right?
That could be another feature book for you. There you go.
It was but this guy made us work our asses off, and it was very arduous. I flunked the first exam, but I got A's, and after that I got on track and figured it out. And I was good at it, and I really was fascinated by this like how nations and states do or don't get along. So I studied political science when I went to McGill, and I minored in art, and I forgot there's an important piece of my youth that I forgot to share. But I minored in art and I minored in Italian.
Is art the piece of your youth that you forgot to share?
Yes.
Well, take
I've
me
always
back.
been an artist. I was always a very good artist when I was a kid. And my high school teacher recommended me for this program where in the New York City metro area, your teacher could recommend you to take classes at night at Parsons School of Design.
Really?
Yeah, so I did.
Okay.
I took college level art classes at Parsons School of Design, and I fucked around and did not take advantage of the gift that I was being given. And I smoked weed, and I would turn giant pieces of paper into paper airplanes and launch them out onto Fifth Avenue with like all the model, you'd draw a nude model pretty much every class. And I would turn them into paper airplanes and launch them out onto Fifth Avenue into taxi cabs because I was that kid when I was high off my tits.
So you do the minor in art, the major in poli-sci. What's the end of college like? Are you, let's go get after this and get a job? Are you aware you don't want to be your dad for the job? Like what's the mode of thinking end of college?
The mode of thinking, I had a job. I had an internship at Doctors Without Borders between my junior and senior year, and my goal was to translate my degree in international relations to work for an international NGO. That did not happen. So I came back to New York thinking I wanted to work at an NGO, and I got a job as a community organizer for the New York Blood Center, which is significant in a very counterintuitive way. One, it was my job to organize and coordinate all of the blood drives in Brooklyn. That was my first job out of college, which meant that as early 2000, like 2000 is when I got that job. So during that time, I am going to kind of gentrifying, but not what Brooklyn is now. So I'm at like JP Morgan and just put a headquarters in Brooklyn. So did Bear Stearns, rest in peace. And so there's a bit of a financial hub, and I organized all those blood drives. But after that, I would go to like a huge mosque on Atlantic Avenue and the Hasidic Jews in Crown Heights. And every Sunday I was at like a giant black church, where there's a gospel choir, and I have to be on stage running their blood drives. And like, so I got to be immersed in every race, creed, color, language, economic strata of this beautiful city. I fell in love with New York in a way that I never did before within that job. It was just amazing. And when September 11th happened, I happened to be there working for the New York Blood Center, and it became my job to coordinate with the Red Cross and make sure that the blood supply for any survivors was like, I was part of the emergency response at the triage centers. So, that sort of weird circumstances, I called it my baptism. That was like the first time I sort of had this thing, which is like, you never know. Like we all think we're going to be fucking heroes, but you don't know. And it was the first time that like crazy, global, insane, like events were like, all right, dude, now would be a good time for you to be a man. and step up and focus and kind of put your feelings to the side and do what needs to be done. And I looking back on it now, I was 24. I was able to. I was going to triage centers. I was there when people were coming across the Brooklyn Bridge. I was at Ground Zero, checking on like how many patients are getting sent to Brooklyn Hospital. And there was this horrible delayed reaction where I was actually at a Black Crowes concert. It was such a strange thing. And that was when I learned that like Chris Mellow, who I played football with, that I learned during that time that he was on one of the planes. But it took 2 weeks for me to feel the feel about it. I was just like an hyper-focused, adrenaline-induced, like, take care of business, do the thing. And then at the Black Crow show at the Beacon Theater, like, it all was like, dude, you just saw something pretty heavy. It was this very strange, delayed reaction of trauma. I don't know. I learned a lot about myself from that experience. If I'm grateful for that first job for many reasons, but being able to be on the front lines of 9/11 was one of them.
The realizing that you were capable, I guess, I'm using be a man in air quotes on this, but just like, you knew you rose to the occasion. You knew, holy crap, this really significant thing is happening. I am a cog in the middle of this system and I just have to get this done. Did reflecting on that surprise you about yourself, or did you feel like I fit into this world in a different way than I understood before this consequential event?
I think when you first realize that you can thrive in a crisis is a very important. You're not always tested in that way. Most people are not tested in that way. And I was, at a very young age, I was. And realizing that I could be useful and valuable and focused and show up for that test. It's a horrible thing to go through, but you become aware of the broadness of your own shoulders, so to speak. And being able to be of service and of value when you're called to serve, it's not easy, but those are going to be the life-defining moments. They really are. And I took that with me afterward for sure. There's a flip side to it. Going back to work when it was no longer crisis mode sucked. It felt empty. All the sort of delayed trauma of going through that started to show up when it wasn't appropriate. When it's like, hey guys, we're no longer dealing with the triage center of September 11th. We just have to kind of do our jobs. There's this really big hangover from that. And I think being an emergency response and then having to go back to just doing your job, it was very hard for me to work without adrenaline inducing. It seemed empty and unnecessary afterward. Not to mention just, I think the whole city and to a certain extent the country, but the city for sure. The year after September 11th was tragic and sad, and just, it was a lot to process.
How's that job end? What's the next step out of that?
I met my girlfriend right before September 11th. She's now my wife. She lived in Glasgow. As that relationship, overseas relationship started to get serious, she was a bit older than me, so I'm like, either she's going to have to live here or I'm going to have to go there. And I realized I was going to go there. I very much realized that there was a huge gap in my understanding of how the world worked because I had never really studied economics. I was very intimidated, and since high school, but I was intimidated by the math of it. And so I wound up doing my master's degree in economics in Glasgow. And I moved to Scotland for 4 years, and I got married to my girlfriend while I lived there. And when I finished my master's degree, I wound up working for an international NGO that had something called Microfinance. And microcredit is a bank that lends money to very poor communities and the poorest countries in the world. And you're making basically small business loans to like syndicates of businesses that will share the credit together. And the way I translated my degree in economics, in development economics, like how to make poor countries less poor, I translated that. And that's what I did. Yeah.
What's the connection? So first off, you meet your girlfriend, you meet your wife in New York City, over there on a trip. Where do you guys meet?
I meet her in New York City. She was dating my best friend from college. My best friend from college called me up. He's like, hey, this girl I'm seeing is coming to New York. She's never seen the city from the perspective of a New Yorker. Would you mind showing her around? And I did. And, we kind of got married a little bit. He's still one of my best friends.
All right.
For what it's worth.
Fair trade. Okay, so
it all worked out in the end.
It all works out in the end. He came to the wedding at least? Yeah.
He was invited. He couldn't make it.
Okay, fair enough. At least the invite was extended.
Sure.
You guys are in Scotland, and then does that job start sending you other places? Like
a little bit.
Okay, so like how does this progress? What happens after this job, or where do you go next?
The business of helping poor people is too important to be left to a charity.
Yeah.
And I became extremely disenchanted with the weird incentives of a charity creating a bank. I hated working in the nonprofit world at that point. You help poor people by helping them build businesses and create jobs rather than donating money that turns into sort of small loans. And I also became, for a bunch of reasons, I was just disenchanted with like what I was doing. And I simultaneously, that coincided with the like .com bubble bursting, and I was really fascinated with capital markets. While I was doing my master's degree, I became really interested in banking. And so I kind of translated, and like living in Glasgow for a New Yorker, I love Glasgow, but it's a very small town. And my wife at the time was like, I'm like, can we please move back to New York? And so we did. I got a job with this startup that was an investment research startup called Innovest. When I moved back to New York, and Innovest was incredible. They were very much focused on how geopolitical, they hired social scientists and environmental engineers and economists to analyze, and like chemists to analyze stocks. And they had very creative, original investment ideas because no one had an MBA. No one had studied, like, how do you structure a discounted cash flow model? Like, maybe a few of us knew it, but it wasn't why Innovest existed. It was because we were looking at our industries with a totally alternative lens. And they hired me to initiate coverage on banks because they were like, that thing that you were doing in microcredit was so interesting. I wonder, like, if all of these mortgages that are happening in the United States in 2005 that are going to people that have never had access to credit before, do you think you could translate your understanding of microfinance to analyze a bank like Citigroup, to evaluate how strong or weak or high risk their portfolio of subprime mortgages is? I'm like, if you're willing to take the risk on me, I will endeavor to like unpack that. And we shook on it, and I did. And that was the report that I first wrote for Innovest in the summer of 2006. Predicted that Bear Stearns, Countrywide Financial, and Lehman Brothers was all going to collapse, and that the bursting of the subprime mortgage bubble would be a over $1 trillion disaster. And that was the first public prediction of the subprime mortgage crisis.
The idea that you go from microcredit and charitable loans to like analyzing subprime and the ninjas, the no income, no job, no application stuff. That's kind of a wild piece of overlap between microcredit and how that applies. It's like the same skill set applying into wildly different spheres. But there's a core element there. Like, how aware of you understanding this denominator were you?
Part of it, the way I look back on it now is that in capital markets, there is peacetime and there is wartime. For a very long time, nothing happens. You should just ride momentum, and then one day, everything happens. And in those days where there is a radical transformation of what moves the market, the people who are excellent at peacetime finance, their skills are no longer relevant. The only people who can see clearly what's happening and what's going to happen next in those wartime moments are people who did not grow up in the system, whose way of evaluating what's driving the market, where there are pockets of mispriced risk, where there's opportunities for mispriced upside, are people who never subscribed to the status quo in the first place, were never groomed to have that job. They had a completely alternative lens to solve the puzzle of capital. I happened to be in the right place at the right time with a completely alternative lens for solving the puzzle of capitalism at exactly the moment where peacetime turned to wartime. So there's some level of like alternative preparedness that made me capable. Like, luck is preparedness times opportunity. I was prepared. I had one tool. When you lend money to poor people, Are they going to be able to pay you back, or is it responsible access to credit, or is it a predatory loan? It's one or the other. It's the only thing I knew how to evaluate. I did not know anything else. That was my preparation. I happened to have that preparation at a moment in time where everybody was like, how do I make more money in mortgages? I had no idea how to answer that question. I wasn't interested in that question. I was only interested in the one tool I had. Are the people borrowing this money to take on those mortgages and buy those homes, are they going to be able to pay it back? I cared about nothing else. I was capable of nothing else. And it was the only question you needed to ask. I was the only one asking it. Yeah, that kind of contrarian, the only people who can have that kind of contrarian thinking in finance are punk. They're totally punk. They willingly and willfully opted out of the conventional way of thinking. They're wired differently. They're weird. They have weird hobbies. And when peacetime turns to wartime, they're the only ones who have an understanding of who's going to be, when is the tide going to go out, and who's going to be swimming with, who is and is not going to be swimming naked.
So you survive the transition into wartime. It comes with the story you told at the front of this interview. It comes with all the things that come after. You start a family around this time, or somewhere in here too, I think?
Yeah, 2007. So right as I'm in the epicenter of the subprime meltdown, my son was born. And then in 2009, Innovest was acquired for $20 million. So we had an exit. So we didn't just survive, we did really well. Like the fact that I was the only one who saw this coming, it also made me an overnight celebrity in a weird way. I was on CNBC every day. I was on the cover of Business Week. I was this little wunderkind in ways that was very dangerous and destructive to the ego. And really made it hard for me to be an employee when we were acquired and had to go into the mainstream of Wall Street.
So this gets explored in your real book, much more. Which the name of the real book.
Confidential?
Not Kitschy Confidential, where you learn how to put those 1-inch buttons on your blazer pocket. Plug the real book, which I have a Kindle version of. I discovered this morning when I went looking for it. It's not the real thing. Say the name of the book.
This might get me fired.
So if you want to hear about Greg's arc, because there's a lot of this, that post-Innovest thing that happens rewires your brain a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Give the audience the Cliff Notes versions of that rewiring of the brain, and then maybe land that on Punks and Pinstripes where you are now.
The thing that struck me the most when I went from this punk rock startup that solved the most important puzzle in finance, literally, to working inside of a big, publicly traded investment bank, was everyone was afraid. Afraid of not getting invited to the CEO's golf outing, afraid of conflict, afraid of not getting access to the right country club, afraid of having an idea that was deviant or different, afraid of innovation, afraid of creativity, afraid of not getting promoted. It was so motivated by self-preservation and self-promotion. And I had come from an environment which was completely fueled by impact and innovation. Let's solve the hardest problem in the world, the most important problem in the world, and let's do it in a way that no one else thought of. And that cultural shift from punk to conformity was the hardest thing I'd ever gone through in my professional existence up to that point. No one had the courage of their convictions. Everyone was just trying to stay out of trouble. Great innovators and innovations were allowed to die on the vine. And oftentimes people who were just politically jealous would actively sabotage them. And that was the norm. And to be a great innovator in that environment, what I realized, and I shifted at a certain point to become the director of innovation at Bloomberg. Your job to make great innovations become huge, fast-growing businesses wasn't just get the technology right and get the strategy right and translate the vision into execution. That was good enough to be a really good startup. But in a corporate environment, your job was anticipate the obstructionist defense and understand how to call the right play to get past it. And that was such a trial by fire. It took me such a long time to realize that was the job. Overcoming obstructionism was the job. Anti-fragile transformation and innovation was the job. And I hated the way academics like Clay Christensen and Rita McGrath, who had observed it from the outside but had never experienced it, would write these books about how it's supposed to work. These guys like David Kidder. They were very astute observers, but they were not survivors. And they would so often just misdiagnose what it was like on the inside. And I think what you read about in my book, and when I finally quit my job at Bloomberg and just started working as an advisor at PwC and Google and Uber, a bunch of other companies, was like, there are 5 different obstructionists that you're going to encounter. And to fail to prepare for them is to prepare to fail. You will always encounter the skeptics, the cops. You will encounter the traditionalist. You will encounter the territorialist, and you are going to encounter the capitalist. And if you do not have the ability to understand exactly what to do when you see that emerge, you are going to make the gigantic mistake of solving the wrong problem, or just allowing it to stay in the quarantine of an innovation lab, which is such a disaster. It's such a disgrace that something so important would be never allowed to graduate from a prototype into a product.
Nothing scarier than being in the petri dish when you realize nothing's ever leaving this petri dish.
I mean, look, there's people who have had very safe and stable, wonderful careers building prototypes for a living.
Yeah.
I don't have anything against it, but no company should actually have, with AI, I think it's the same thing. If you think you can have an AI lab We're looking at the hangover of this right now. It's building. The amount of built up AI inventories in the enterprise because they have literally no human infrastructure for scaling cutting edge technology to either grow sales, reduce cost, or mitigate risk because it has lived in an innovation studio. And that's the only human capital they know they've ever had. It is an inevitability that these data centers that are dependent on, the JP Morgans and the Morgan Stanleys of the world and the Citigroups of the world buying billions of dollars of AI capability. They don't have the ability to integrate innovation into their core business. They have viewed it as, and they've also purged all the great innovators from their company. I'm one of them. So my eyes are so wide open to what the human barriers of innovation adoption are in these institutions. And that is the big, there will be a headline at some point that a company like JP Morgan cancels 79% of its orders. And that is going to send a ripple effect through the stock market. It's going to mean that there are $500 billion of data centers that just go frozen and don't ever get built. And because we're not looking at institutions that have done the very hard work of we are going to scale this until it is deeply integrated into the way we make money. It's going to pass the fuck you pay me test. We have very clear earnings impact of innovation. They haven't, the time to have built that capability was 4 years or 40 years before you started to take AI seriously. So my eyes are wide open to that risk because I navigated that resistance my whole life.
As a true obstruction agent, I have some notes for you. And I'm
Please.
going to obstruct you from the end of this episode till I ask you a few quick questions here. I have to ask you, I think first, you talked about your dad having to endure that job. And I feel like there's a good version of endurance and a bad version of endurance. What is that?
There is pressure and there is stress in any career. Right now, I am building Punks and Pinstripes, a community for executives who are unlocking greatness after reinventing themselves. People who've enjoyed incredible success, found it unfulfilling, and embark on building another mountain of success for themselves. It's very hard what I do, Matt. How do you find people who are in their second mountain? They don't list it on their LinkedIn profile. What are you doing for them to create value? How do you send the bat signal so that they know to come to you? All of these things are very hard. And every executive community that is out there is for people who are on the first mountain and want to go further up that mountain. I know that I am solving an important problem. Isolation and reinvention are two totally unmet needs in executive leadership. And I solve for it. I'm building a community to solve for it. So I don't wake up wondering if it's the right thing to do. I wake up freaking out about how hard it is, but I don't wake up wondering if it's right, if I believe in it. In fact, sometimes I wish I believed in it less because it's so hard. So I think that's pressure. Pressure is healthy. Pressure makes good economies. Pressure is resilience inducing. Pressure is weightlifting. Stress is like the pain of wondering, what the hell's the point? What's the point? That's stress. My dad had to live knowing that he was solving an important problem. Mentally ill, drug abuse is a thing, but for an institution that he didn't trust to get it right, for people that he didn't trust to get it right. And that's a huge difference.
2 more questions for you. First one is the hard one. Second one's the easy one.
Go.
Did you get hit harder at a hardcore show or on the football field?
Oh, definitely on the football field.
Yeah, I would hope so. But
in the 90s, high school football was a huge concussion-inducing, yeah.
as a point of pride, to my understanding.
Yes, like you were taught to lead with the head.
People want to find you on the internet. They want to bug you. They want to learn about punks and pinstripes. Where do you want to send them?
Go to punksandpinstripes.com or hit me up on LinkedIn.
Hit him up on LinkedIn. Check out the books. Greg Larkin. He's building a remarkable community. It's that blood bank ethos for living in a time of peace or war with where you are in life writ large. I respect the hell out of what you're doing, Greg. You're truly an intentional investor. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.